respond to questions. And Helen, I believe you have the first one.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your warm reception of the Rostenkowski plan, does that mean you are ready to negotiate tax increases and a freeze on Social Security benefits, things you have never gone for in the past?
No, it doesn't. The answer is no. Follow up.
Follow up?
Yeah.
You are not willing to negotiate, or what is your
overall feeling? Look, I think he, without rancor, without a lot of rhetoric, made a very broad proposal. We've made a proposal, the administration. We now would like to hear from the budget process on the Hill what their proposal is, and then we'll talk. But perhaps, as I told some reporters yesterday, I was, in being receptive through not knocking the things in it we don't like, and there are plenty, I was somewhat colored by the way in which Chairman Rostenkowski approached this, and with I think the evident goodwill in his part and determination to try to break the ice and move the process forward.
You're not saying whether you would go for a tax increase?
No, I'm not for a tax. Let me.
How about a freeze on Social Security?
Well, there's a lot of things I'm not for that are in his proposal. A lot, including taxes. Yeah, Terry.
Mr. President, the United States has never recognized the forced incorporation of Lithuania into the Soviet Union. Now that Lithuania has declared its independence, the United States seems to be moving tentatively toward full recognition. Is that because we're afraid of offending Mr. Gorbachev or don't want to alienate him?
It's because we want to see the evolution of the control of the territory there, and also we want to see peaceful resolution to this question.
Well, do we still regard Lithuania as a captive nation, along with the other foreigners?
We might not use that word, but we never have regarded Lithuania as incorporated into the Soviet Union. That's been our policy. And we rejoice as people are permitted the free expression that we take for granted in this country. And clearly, I think there's a great deal of interest in this concept of working it out, Lithuanians working it out with the Soviets to achieve what they want. And so we're not standing in that way, but in terms of recognition, there is a standard of control of one's territory that we are, that I've been advised should guide this. Yeah, right here. We go across the back.
President, are you concerned about the apparent reluctance of the Contras to disband, and what can you do about it?
Yes, I am concerned about it. I talked to, and I'm also concerned about certain military action by the Sandinistas. But I'm also encouraged, Brett, and I'm encouraged because yesterday I talked to Dan Quayle, and he told me of his visit with Ortega, where Ortega seemed concerned about, or seemed willing to transfer the defense ministry, seemed willing to transfer the interior ministry, and was open about the discussion of reducing, I want to be careful here, I don't overstate it, but reducing military action on both sides. There is a United Nations vehicle that can be helpful, UNUCA, UNUCA, ONUCA, which could have a useful role to play in the separation of forces and in getting done what Violeta Chamorro wants, which is to both sides start laying down their weapons. That ONUCA has support from other leaders in this hemisphere. Carlos Andres Perez, I believe, supports it. I know Mrs. Chamorro wants us to give more support to this, so I've asked the State Department to look into that immediately. So I'm less concerned than I was about the peaceful transfer of power, including the military, but I think to the degree both sides can start laying down weapons and moving towards the kind of market economies we're talking about, and with less reliance on military, it's better. So I can't say I'm not concerned, but I am encouraged the way it's going so far.
Mr. President, do you regret the other day raising the issue of settlements in East Jerusalem?
No, I don't regret it. I think all the speculation and commentary of the last 10 days have blown things way out of proportion. What I was doing was reiterating United States policy. But let me say this. Right now in Israel, there's internal developments taking place in the political scene there. And I do not want to look in any way like we're trying to mingle into the internal affairs of Israel as they're going through this difficult political problem right now. And so I will answer no more on it. I'll try to clarify it because you have the follow-up. But it's so sensitive and it is so emotional that I just think any further speculation on this question would be certainly not be useful given what's happened just in the last few hours.
Well, can I just ask that?
Yeah, you can ask.
I'm not really clear why you raised the issue at all. Was there a particular reason? It's long been part of U.S. policy, but
Yeah.
it hasn't been talked about a lot.
Well, I understand that. That's why I will speculate no further on it. I think it is highly emotional, and but I think any speculation and any commentary at this juncture, because a lot of developments since I made that comment, would be counterproductive. Yeah, in the middle.
Mr. President, following up on Helen's question, can I ask, beyond your well-known friendship with Chairman Rostenkowski, what elements of the plan do you see as meritorious?
The fact that he is aimed at getting the deficit down. Does that help you any?
Oh, because it doesn't say do you have any ideas to throw in beyond his?
Well, we've thrown our ideas out on the table, John, and he's now thrown his out, and now we'd like to have the leaders of the budget process on the Hill throw theirs out, and then perhaps we can talk. Look, there's a lot of changes in the world, a lot of changes out there in terms of Eastern Europe and the requests that I'm making today, a lot of things going on. And so I don't want to appear totally inflexible, but I'm not about to stand here and give Dan or the Congress the idea that I want to accept several of the things that are in his approach. But will I be willing to talk when we get all these proposals out there? Certainly. Are we prepared to negotiate? Absolutely, yeah.
Mr. President, you opened your comments today by saying that the day of the dictator was over and speaking of the moves toward democracy in 1989. And yet the exception to that rule is the situation in China, where since the crackdown at Tiananmen Square, we've seen little moves toward democracy and freedom there. Do you have any second thoughts about the approach that you took toward the situation in China and your sending of your high-level envoys there? And any thoughts that this policy must now change because of a lack of response from the Chinese government?
No, but I'm not happy with the evolution of reform in China, but I have no regrets about that. And I'm reinforced by a lot of expert opinion that feels the approach I took, accomplishing something by executive order that the Congress wanted to do dramatically later on through legislation, was the proper approach. And so I hope our policy will bear more fruit. But no, I am not happy with the status quo.
Well, Mr. President, if you're not happy with the status quo, why not change your policy now to take a tougher line toward the Chinese regime?
Because I'm familiar with China, and I think we're on the right track. And I hope that we'll see an evolution of more reform. And that's exactly why not change it now. Yeah.
Mr. President, back to the surprising administration reaction to the Rostenkowski proposal. Regardless of whatever negotiating positions are being drawn now or politics is being played, can you today assure the American people that there will be no tax increase, no new taxes this year?
I'm only one player, but you know my position. And I have no intention of changing that position.
Under what circumstances might you?
Too hypothetical. Nice try. Too hypothetical. Right here, lady in the front row.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you something about your Nicaragua/Panama proposal.
Yes.
But in light of what the majority leader of the House says, that you have not shown strong leadership, you do not propose in your... Mr. Gephardt.
Oh.
Majority leader.
For the clarification. I have a follow-on.
My Nicaragua question is, you are not proposing to Congress exactly where to cut in the defense budget. You're basically leaving that to them. Why don't you tell them where they should cut specifically?
On offsets?
Yes.
From the defense budget?
Why don't you say, here's a B2, take it. And,
We are doing that. And what I'm saying to them is, well, that's in negotiation up there, but what I've also said here is, if you're not willing to do it, give me the authority on March 27th, and it'll be done like that. I am willing to do it. We're going to take the hits. We're negotiating with Congress now. We'll tell them on March 27th if they turn it to me. And right now, I don't know how much of it's confidential, but I'll let the Secretary of Defense answer the question. But I don't see any great secrecy in this. What we're trying to do is to give the Congress the ball and say, here's what we recommend. Now you tell us what you want to do, but don't go making a lot of add-ons. Do it the way we feel is necessary to keep the focus on Nicaragua and Panama. I think Congress has a very legitimate role here, but if they're not willing to fulfill it, Leslie, we have no problem giving you a list that would take care of it just like that. But I think it's the Congress's role now to work with our people.
Why does Gephardt get under your skin so much? You've got a, 80% approval rating. He makes a speech attacking you and
well, what have I said? Now, what would make you think that he gets under my skin?
What he says you're not a strong leader, and all the people around the White House.
That's so discouraging. But why do you think it gets under my skin? The honest answer is, I know you won't believe this, it doesn't. It doesn't. I think we're going in the right direction. We're talking substance and policy. I think many in the Congress think that we are being responsive. But look, I expect that. I expect that kind of political criticism. But I think if you want to talk about the substance of his ideas, do I think it's a good idea to loan money to the Soviet Union today? No. We have no request for food aid to the Soviet Union. You just want to put it on a ship and send it over there? No, I don't think that's a particularly brilliant idea. But I don't want to knock the man. Maybe he'll come on a good idea one of these days. Yeah.
The Nicaraguans and the Panamanians are expecting aid very soon. They are in urgent need of the aid.
Exactly.
And the Panamanians say that they cannot wait any longer. What can you do besides Congress? When can they expect something?
I'm going to have this question replayed on Capitol Hill because you're absolutely right. There is a sense of urgency. And I would like to take the opportunity here to encourage the movement in the Congress. We've sent a proposal up on Panama. Now let's get going on it. Now we're coupling it with Nicaragua. Now let's going on it. There's an urgency in Nicaragua too, but Panama very urgent, and so we're gonna keep pushing. But I think you're right on target with that hypothesis. Yeah, dear.
Mr. President, there was a report last week that you were so angry and upset at the Fed's failure to lower interest rates that you wouldn't reappoint Chairman Greenspan next year when his term ends. Can you comment on whether there's any thought you've given yet to the question of reappointing Mr. Greenspan and the level of frustration you do feel about interest rates?
No, there is no discussion of that nature at all. I'm not sure I saw the report, but I saw some speculation someplace. Maybe it was on the TV, but I have that's never been discussed with me. Now, if the question is, am I happy with interest rates? Look, every president would like to see interest rates lower. There's no question. I don't knock the concern that some have on inflation. The president has to be concerned about inflation too. But there's no bubbling war with Alan Greenspan, and that's what I got from what commentary I heard that there was. But you know, going back a few years here, it's ever been thus, hasn't it? When there's some differences, it's always built into a a conflict between the president and the chairman of the Fed, and I don't want to get into that game because I don't feel that way.
But is there a particular feeling at this point that the Fed is dragging its feet somewhat and getting interest rates
I think
down?
some feel that way, and I think some probably agree with the concerns of the inflationary concerns that have been expressed. So, but I'm not in a mode of a Fed bashing mode. I also think it's very sensitive in terms of markets and everything else to even go as far as I have done, trying to say very little and succeeding only moderately. Yeah.
Mr. President, you've been at near historical public approval ratings now for well into your first term, 80% or more. And my question is whether you believe in spending some of this popularity on something controversial, like, say, what specifically you like about Rostenkowski's proposal, or just hoarding it. What's the goal?
I don't believe it. It's one thing. I don't believe in polls that much.
Well, I guess the question is, are you
Talk to Nicaragua's man. Talk to Ortega's man. Probably gainfully unemployed right now for missing it by a jillion points. Look, these things come and go, seriously. And I learned this. You know where I learned it? Back in Illinois in 1980. And I don't remember why, but I remember Vic Gold lecturing me on hanging your hat on poles. That's not that's not the way I try to call the shots on the policy. You just raised the question about China. If I had my finger in the wind, I might have done that one differently. Might have done differently about going to Cartagena if I put my finger in the wind in terms of polls. But that's not the way I run this administration. And so I know some think so, but that's not the point. And so I'm not going to dwell on them because tomorrow it may be very different. Then I'll have a constancy. Hey, wait a minute.
Can I drill on for one more question? Does it become a possibility, though, that when you're at like 80%, that almost becomes an end in itself at some point? I mean, it's such an extraordinary level.
You mean pull the ripcord and get out?
Well, I mean...
What do you mean?
Well, when you're at 80%, it would be tempting, I would think, just to simply protect that lead, sort of fall on the ball.
No, I don't. Please believe me, that doesn't guide the decisions we take. And I've given you a couple of examples, and I'm trying to do the best I can for the country and to work with the Congress. And there's a lot of areas where I have not succeeded near as well as I would like to. But I don't live by the polls. Yeah, Maureen.
Mr. President, last week we learned that you were so concerned about the hostages that you were willing to take a questionable call, and it might have been from the Iranian president, and then of course you found out it wasn't. In response, Rafsanjani made a statement saying that you had been trying to get a hold of him for a month. Did you actually then try to place a call to the real person, or could you clarify?
I don't know where he got that. I saw that statement, and there was no truth in it. Trying to contact him for a month would be very easy to do. I responded to an incoming call. I think the bottom line is you have to say, would you do it again based on the information you had? And I'd say, yeah, I probably would. May be difficult for somebody to get through again, but what's wrong with reaching out and touching someone when the hostages are at stake? The hostages are at stake here, and what's wrong with trying? And I feel this all the time. I've talked about this, that I will go the extra mile, and when the whole story comes out on this, you all are going to be very, very fascinated with the details. Very fascinated. But I'm just telling you that it is important. It is very important to run down every avenue in terms of these hostages. And I would be remiss if I didn't. And there are things that going around in back alleys and trying to find out information, and we've got to do that. I owe it to the families of those people and to those people themselves that are held hostages.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
If you didn't try to reach him for a month, can you say whether you or anyone acting on your behalf did try to reach him at all?
Have we been trying to reach Rafsanjani?
Have you tried, yes.
No, other than this one phone call that turns out to be a hoax.
far as you can tell, what he was saying just didn't make any sense.
And yeah, it's very much like the rhetoric that they use from time to time. He's got some political problems at home, and we understand that. The main thing is, can we move forward and get the hostages out? And I'll repeat, goodwill begets goodwill. And I think that I'm satisfied that even in this instance, the officials there know that nobody's trying to set them up or anything of that nature. I'm interested in saving American lives.
Mr. President, I understand that TASS is reporting this morning that the Soviet Parliament has granted President Gorbachev the expanded powers he wants and has been requesting. I'm interested, sir, if you side with those within the Soviet Union who fear that there are not sufficient checks and balances on this new presidential system, that it could result in a more totalitarian Soviet Union. How you feel this might affect your dealings with Gorbachev, and whether you envision extending this fund for democracy, perhaps one day, the Soviet Union itself.
I answer that by saying I stay out of the internal affairs and deliberations of the Soviet Union. They are going through a process of reform, which we support in broad terms, perestroika. They're going through a process of glasnost, which is openness, which we support, and it would be very inappropriate for the President of the United States to start passing judgment as that process of perestroika, democratization, if you will, moves forward. And so, yes, the Soviets have created a new post of president, I hear, but that's their business. And we will work with in this instance, President Gorbachev. As you know, I think we have a reasonably good relationship there, respectful one, and I'm going to continue to work with him.
Well, can you say, sir, whether you think that as you continue to work with him, that will be affected in any way by these changes that have taken place, or is it going to be as it has been between you and Mr. Gorbachev? And would you see involving the Soviet Union in this fund for democracy?
Involving, you mean asking them to give money to...
No. Including them, making them, if not currently, as Gephardt has suggested, perhaps one day a beneficiary of this fund for democracy.
I think the answer is to help in a technical way as best we can for helping the Soviets move towards market economies and free markets and those kinds of consideration. I think that's the next step we ought to take. And there's discussion of an Eastern Development Bank. The question is out there whether the Soviets should be members of that bank or not. And as a matter of fact, we have some deliberations going on as to what the U.S. position should be right now. I'm not prepared to state it, but I've been spending some time on this question. But that's an idea that was surfaced by Francois Mitterrand, I believe. So there are all kinds of ways in which down the road we could work with the Soviet Union. But I think what they need now from us is know-how and technical knowledge, that kind of thing. Yeah, Dave.
Mr. President, after your meeting in Palm Springs with Prime Minister Kaifu, he took a real beating in the Japanese diet, and I wonder if in retrospect, were there any misunderstandings in your conversations? He was accused in Japan by his critics of having made some concessions or reached a level of detail in your discussions that some in Japan were unhappy with. Is there any clarification needed about what came out of Palm Springs?
You know what, I think those reports just highlight the sensitivity of the situation in Japan. And I think as far as I'm concerned, the talks were very good. We followed up, incidentally, with close to an hour with Mr. Takeshita yesterday and covered the same broad agenda. I didn't go into every specific, but I'm convinced that both Mr. Kaifu left Palm Springs and Takeshita will leave Washington with a far better understanding of the problems that we face, and hopefully I have a better understanding of theirs. So I think I'm aware of the criticism against him at home, But I think that I would just go back to the statements he made when he left Palm Spring, which I viewed as very constructive.
Just one follow-up. You said in a speech the day after you got back to the Electronics Association that you had discussed telecommunications with him. And that apparently came as a surprise to some people in